Thank you very much for joining us at today's webinar. I'm Jeremy Davis. I'm Head of Impact and Communications at the Fatherhood Institute, and I'm very excited that we're here with you today to share our new report, The Kids Are All Right, Adolescents and Their Fathers in the UK. Today's presentation will last about 45 minutes, and then there'll be 15 minutes for questions and answers. So we're scheduled to finish at 1:30. I'm reliably informed that you should be able to leave your questions via the Q&A button at the top of your screen. And we'll do our best to get to as many of those as possible today. If you have any burning questions that we don't get to, or you want to connect with us in some other way, then you'll find Adrienne's email address along with our summary blog, the new report that we're launching today, and some case studies on our website. If you go to the research section, and you'll find a Contemporary Fathers in the UK page, you'll find everything you need there. So I'm here to introduce Adrienne Burgess, the Fatherhood Institute's joint CEO and Head of Research. Adrienne is the lead author of the report. And for me, she is one of Britain's unsung heroes. She has worked tirelessly for the last quarter of a century to reshape the public narrative about fatherhood. Her work is driven by a strong belief in fathers' importance and capacity to care, and an understanding that gender equality will never be achieved until mothers and fathers are supported to share the caregiving as well as the earning. Her pursuit of more balanced, evidence-based research, policy and practice around fatherhood is dogged, and never more so than in the Contemporary Fathers in the UK series of evidence reviews, which the Nuffield Foundation has been funding us to conduct since 2017. The Kids Are All Right is the 6th report in that series, and I'm delighted to hand over to Adrienne to share her findings and insights with us all. Over to you.
Thank you, Jeremy. I'm very happy to be here, and I'm now going to have that moment where you try to share, or I try to share, my PowerPoint. So let's see where we go on this. And there it is. And now let me put it on slideshow. Slideshow. Yes. Aha. Slideshow. Play from start. Great. Now you don't have to look at me so much, you can look at the report. So, okay, as Jeremy has said, the report is up on the website. You can find it. The Kids Are All Right is what we called it. It's a slightly provocative title, but I hope you'll understand by the end of this presentation why we chose that title. So let me just sort of take you through some of the aims of the research and what we and how we went about it. So what we were looking for really in the research, in the UK research, were associations between what we've called father factors, things to do with dads, their characteristics, their well-being, their socioeconomic status, their behaviours, all those kind of things that could be identified in research, to look for associations between those and adolescent outcomes. And in the report and here today, I'm going to just give you a taster of some of the associations we found with academic attainment, with adolescent mental health, and with adolescent risk behaviours. That was the main driver for what we were doing. So we also wanted to identify research and analysis gaps. And we have another part of this whole project, Kids Are All Right, coming up on the 13th of December, when my colleague and co-author of this report, Rebecca Goldman, will present on research and analysis gaps. She's been doing a lot of work on that while I've been reviewing the research. The other thing we do in this report, and we always do, is to make recommendations for policy and practice. So let's a little bit about the Fatherhood Institute. We've been going from around 2000. We work in lots of local authorities helping, and that's the practice bit, helping family professionals, teachers and so on, just engage better with dads so that they don't unwittingly shut fathers out, but they think fathers and try to include them. And we do our policy work, obviously, and then research. And this, of course, falls firmly into our research brief. So what are our sources and methods? Well, we have this wonderful thing. It is our literature library. And the Nuffield Foundation, when they first started funding us, which was nearly 10 years ago, 2014, with the first publication from the funding was 2017, I said to them at the time, well, we need to have a really good evidence base. If we're going to look at contemporary fathers in the UK, we need to know what we're talking about. So they gave us some money to set up a literature library. All that means is it's online. It has all the records, all the book chapters, policy documents, practice guides, public attitude surveys, anything that pertains to fathers in the UK, we collect it. And it's a big job. We keep on doing it all the time. And that means that, we're in a very good place to start researching a particular topic. And also we can offer this to other researchers if they ask us and pay us a small amount of money. So in our UK library group, in this literature library, we have actually 4,250 records. It is amazing that so many articles, book chapters and so on do relate to fathers in the UK. Now, so that we can search these records on a particular topic, either for ourselves or other researchers, we keyword them. We look through the abstracts and then often through the whole of the PDF, and we find out what the topics are that particular record or publication is dealing with. And when we looked, we found that we had 540 records that we'd keyworded adolescent. And we then started to look in these 540 records for analyses of longitudinal and cross-sectional quantitative studies. We wanted huge studies. We weren't interested in looking at, an analysis of 30 fathers in York or whatever. We wanted to look at the big picture and at empirical evidence, meaning evidence that's been measured or observed in some cases. So there are lots of these wonderful studies, longitudinal, meaning children have been tracked over time, and cross-sectional, which means a big survey done where you're looking at things in a snapshot way at one particular time. So growing up in Scotland is one we've used. The Millennium Cohort Study we've used a lot. I won't go into the details, don't have time. It's amazing. And we use quite a lot of that in this presentation. Understanding Society is another, but there are about 12, 14, and we cite them all in the report. Now, of those 540 records, that were there, we found 118 records that were drawing on this kind of longitudinal cross-sectional quantitative research, and we drew on 118 for this study. So one of the things that we looked at, as I've said, is educational attainment. So I'm going to start by just giving you a few little bullet points of some associations that researchers, not ourselves, other researchers had found between father factors and adolescent outcomes. It doesn't cover the whole spectrum. I can't go into any detail much on each one, but I hope they'll whet your appetite to look further in the report. I think this one is stunning. The father's education level is a more powerful influence on their offspring's educational aspirations and on educational outcomes than any other factor measured, including either mother's education or family income. that's a really sort of interesting finding, and it just shows us how important educating fathers is, just as important to educate mothers. Fathers who are and mothers who are better educate fundamentally parent better. And so their children we just want to educate the whole population. And the better we can do that, the better parenting we get and the better outcomes for our children. Now, this is one of the things we find a lot of. There's been a lot of research looking at the impact or the associations between fathers' depression at various time points and outcomes for their children and young people and even adults. And so this is one. Father's depression in the first year after the birth is associated with poorer school performance at child age 16. I mean, that is a kind of pretty amazing finding, very high quality research, this. And we can look at, we don't have time to look at why, but I hope we address that partly in the report. Similarly, and this I found interesting, a father's previous job loss was associated with lower GCSE grades and attainment at age 16. And this was even when the father had become re-employed and when the family finances had recovered. It wasn't to do with that. It was to do with the fact that when there was a job loss, a sudden job loss, it has an association with the way the young people, the kids feel. They lose hope. They feel very upset. And it's that sort of thing. And so just looking at this, you see that fathers matter so much. And if we don't really work to make sure that we are engaging with them and helping them feel that they matter, that we're not serving our children well. Okay, so here, where's my, yes, 3 more I've got for you here. This is cross-sectional research, meaning that it's happening all at the same time. So the young people who report high levels of time spent with their father during adolescence, plus feeling emotionally close to him, are more academically motivated and have more positive attitudes to school. There could be lots of reasons for this, can't go into it, but there it is. Now we have another longitudinal one. I love this sort of stuff. So the father involvement at age 7 independently predicts educational attainment at age 20 in both intact and separated families. Again, the reasons for this are multiple, but we do see really 2 things shining through, I would say. The amount of time fathers spend with their children and the quality of their parenting. And then the third one is the quality of the relationship. These 3 things are influential beyond anything else. So a father's interest in his child education, of course, is important. And this is an interesting one. It strongly predicts sons and daughters' qualifications in the most disadvantaged families. You know, I sometimes think if I had one good father to give out, and I had a disadvantaged family and I had a well-off family, who would I give the dad to? The good dad I would give to the poorer family because they have so many stressors. And if you have a good dad in there, and a good mum, of course, but a good dad, that is a buffer against quite a lot of the negative stuff that poorer families have to face. Okay, now I'm going to move away from looking at the associations between the father factors and the adolescent outcomes, which we'll look at later on again. But I wanted to do something that we think is incredibly important. I noticed Lord Farmer, I think just last week, was going on about a generation of fatherless boys and how, you know, these poor single mothers are supposed to teach their children right from wrong. And it was the old panic thing about the fatherless society. So one of the things we've been looking at over time, and we had some special analysis done for this review, in fact, by Professor Steve Mackay, who's a real expert, using data from the Millennium Cohort Family Study. So this is with children born in the year 2000. They've been tracking over time. So in 2017, 2018, they went out, the interviewers went out into the field and they interviewed the young people and still their parents, but more of the young people. on their lives. I mean, this is kind of wonderful stuff. And we're using a lot of that in this section. Right. I want you to do some work, though. I want you to think about father absence, if you like. And by examining your own beliefs and your own perceptions. So I'm going to give you a multiple choice question, 3 percentages. You're to choose one, and I will then give you the correct answer on the next slide. By jointly registering the birth of their baby, what we mean, of course, is that both parents' names are on the birth certificate. So clearly at that point, both the birth father and mother are in the child's life. And very often when they're not married, which is actually a majority of couples, certainly at a first child, they have to both go along to the registry office to get both names on the birth certificate. It can be a bit of a palaver. So what percentage of parents today, birth parents, jointly register the birth? Is it 87%, is it 95%, or is it 73%? It's one of those. Take your pick. And here is the answer. It's 95%. I put 95.4%, being a bit smart, because I checked out the birth registration data the other day, and in England it's now gone up to 95.4%. So 20 years ago it was 92.5%. So I mean, fathers have been around, very closely involved for 2 decades or more, of course, but it is creeping up even further. So there we have 95% of parents where the father is definitely in the child's life in the first year after the birth. Here's the next one. People sometimes say to me, okay, all right then, so you've got 95%, that's amazing. We never thought it was that much. But they'll say, of course, it all falls apart after that, doesn't it? The family breakdown rate is high, and so the fathers and their kids won't be in much contact. So we looked at that. The data is there in the Millennium Cohort study. This has been analysed by other researchers, not us. This early stuff has been known for quite a long time. So we've got another multiple choice. We're looking at the percentage of children who still live with both their birth parents at the same address, or if they don't, are in touch with their birth father at age 5, regular touch. So what you've got is your multiple choice. Is it 86%? Is it 94%? Is it 72%? And the answer is 94%. What that means is that there's hardly any slippage, if you like. About 95 to 96% of the children are in touch with the fathers are in touch with the babies in the first year, and by age 5 it's slipped to 94%. But that means for over 5 years, most of these children have either been living with their dads or in touch with him. So there we go. There's a bit of movement in and out, but mainly that's where you're getting. Question 3, what percentage of children live with or are in touch with their birth father by age 11? Is it 87%? Is it 92%? Is it 69%? It's 87%. So what that means is that that's been a slippage from the 95% or 96% that are seeing, are in touch with him at the birth, but it's not it's not fatherlessness. Most of these kids and their fathers are still getting it together. So I've got some nice little, a nice graph or two that Jeremy, who introduced me today, Jeremy did these for us. So looking at the Millennium Cohort study data, you'll see, look at the first thing there, you've got the 86%. This is where the fathers and mothers are living together. As you know, at the birth, 95% of the parents are jointly registering the birth, but they're not all living together in the same household. In the year 2000, it was 86% were living together in the same household. It's about the same now. That hasn't changed very much. There's this sort of core of about 1 in 6 families who are not cohabiting at the time of birth. Those relationships are the most vulnerable, but some of those do move in together later. It's an interesting kind of movement. So that's what's happening when they're, in terms of co-residence, it's 86%. It was 86% in the year 2000 from this sample, and by time the kids are 17, look, we've dropped right down to 53%. So there's been a big drop in the cohabitation with the child in the same household. Now, that's where the Lord Farmers get it wrong. I mean, Lord Farmer assumes, and lots of researchers have too, that once the couple are the parents are no longer living together with the child in the same household, the father goes AWOL. And so Farmer, if he looked at any figures, which he possibly didn't, would have assumed that, well, almost half of these kids are not seeing their dads. But this is not the case. Now we've got this other Jeremy chart. So you see the blue line again, which is showing the cohabitation or co-residence down there to 53%, as in the previous slide. But look, when you look at, and you're asking about whether they're living with or in contact with their dads, it's dropped. Look, it's down to 85% by age 17. But look how high it stayed. So that from even when some of them have dropped out, lots of them actually didn't drop out until quite later. So this is clearly not the fatherless society. Now I want to look at one other thing before we leave all this math stuff. I want to look at the future. We think, having looked at the demographics, the population studies, that more and more fathers are going to be living with their children in the same household from birth. And that will also probably mean that those who don't are more likely to stay in touch. So just be patient and let us take you through this. There are two factors that predict that the parents will split up or be quite miserable together, but will split up. One of those is the age at the birth, the parent's age at the birth of the child. And teenage pregnancy, of course, was the big one we all talked about for a very long time, because the children born to teenage mothers often were also born to very young fathers, and not actually teenagers, certainly early 20s, and these relationships were on the whole very unstable. So the teenage pregnancy, the teenage conception, and of course the teenage birth rate are both significant in predicting what is likely to happen in the future. So here we have a graph, not ours, of teenage conceptions in England and Wales between 1990 and 2021. And here it is. Isn't that an amazing graph? You see the peak is here. I'm putting glasses on and look at what year that was. I can't really see, 2009, I think. And then you're down, 2010. So 2012 actually was the peak year for one parent, for so-called lone parent families. They've been dropping off, much smaller proportion of all families since then. And here you can see this is teenage conceptions. So not all of these even led to births, but look at that. Now, the other thing I pointed out, and I said was that was significant in whether parents stay together is education and, education, socioeconomic advantage or disadvantage. This is a very recent study out of Oxford, John Ermush, who's a wonderful demographer. And he looked at the number of children being born in what they call the total fertility rate, the number of children being born per woman in 2010 to 2012, and more recently 2017 to 2020. So I'll talk you through this chart, which you're probably already looking at and trying to work out. So what Ermush did was he said, right, okay, I'm going to divide these women who are now of childbearing age into 3 different groups. And 2 of the groups where the mother's own education and her mother's education were low. So they were the most entrenchedly disadvantaged women. And then he looked at the other ones at the most highly, where the mother's own education, the woman's own education and her mother's education were high, so tertiary levels. So these are the most advantaged and well-educated women. And he said, how many children were they having, these women, in 2010 to 2012? Well, the poorer women the less advantaged women were having 2.33 children per woman, which was more than the women being born, the children being born to the best educated women, which is 1.82 per woman across their lifetime. The difference, the percentage difference, was 0.51. So that's quite high. But then he said, now I've got the data, he says, on 2017 to 2020. And I find two things. Our population, our population is falling, of course. We know that from the point of view of births. And yes, look, here we have the poorer women, the least well-educated women. They're now down to 1.64 children per woman. They've dropped a lot from 2.33. The best educated women have also dropped. They've dropped from 1.82 to 1.39. But there's a narrowing of the difference between them. It's now only 0.25. So if you look across the whole population, this means that there are not so many children being born into families that are poor and disadvantaged and therefore more likely to break up. So I hope I've got that right, and I hope it interests you and that we might see even better results with dads in the future. Now, adolescent mental health. Just want to give you a few points as I did with educational attainment. I want to say this is an area where the catastrophizing is just amazing in the press. I mean, every other week, some report comes out that says all these kids are falling apart and COVID did dreadful things and they're all, Now, a lot, of course, the mental health services are struggling more than they were, largely because of more demand. It doesn't mean that actually people are worse. It just means that they're now stepping forwards. There's all kinds of reasons why you can get this kind of sensationalist reporting. Often it is sensationalist. So I looked around among this. I had tried to find my way among it. And finally, I worked out from finding some wonderful researchers who are experts in child and adolescent mental health that there's one survey, which is the gold standard, and that's been tracking the mental health of children and young people in England over a long time, uses the same measures, and we can be pretty, they've got a new report just out today, actually. They're the gold standard because actually it's their data the Office for National Statistics uses when it puts out a lot of their statements on young people's mental health. And there's my phone going, and that's very naughty, and I'm going to put it out. I'm sorry about that. There we go. So the adolescent mental health stuff, I want to look at the father factors now. So depression in fathers in their infant's first year, again, we've got this longitudinal thing. Depression in fathers in their infant's first year is associated with higher depression scores in their children at ages 9 to 11 and in daughters at age 18. The increases in mental health problems in adolescence is driven by daughters. So that's a big thing to notice. And here we see this correlation between the father's depression in the first year, just as we saw a correlation between that depression and less good academic outcomes. So these fathers really do need to be looked at in the first year as much as mothers do, because what's going on in the families is very difficult and has far-reaching consequences. So academics, they say, well, what are the mechanisms of influence between, one factor and another? And it's very clear that one of the mechanisms of influence is that the father's depression or mental distress, anxiety works in a similar way, have very negative impacts on his parenting. So negative expressiveness, time not spent with his child, conflict with his child's mother, harsh parenting, low warmth. And of course, that can continue. Once you're in that cycle, changing it over time can be really hard. And that is likely to be one of the mechanisms by which mental distress in fathers at any time point has a negative outcome on their children. So we'll look at a bit of cross-sectional research. Teenage girls who did not report a close relationship with their birth father at the time. So we're looking at a snapshot now, cross-sectional research, not longitudinal. Teenage girls who did not report a close relationship with their birth father at the time are significantly greater risk of mental health difficulties. This is Millennium Cohort data again, and also low life satisfaction, low self-concept, and persistent negative feelings. So the close relationship with the birth father, whether or not he lives with them, is very crucial to teenage girls and teenage boys, in fact. But remember that the problems in adolescent mental health are very much being driven by girls. Here are 3 more. Conversely to that, adolescents, this is both boys and girls, who report easy communication with their father had the highest life satisfaction, and it was even higher than those reporting easy communication with their mother. Now, I haven't the first idea why, when mothers spend more time with their children over the lifespan, clearly, on the whole, not always, but on the whole, why you have a stronger father effect than a mother effect. There may be clever people among you who could enlighten me, in which case, please, answers on a postcard, please, or in an email. I would be hugely grateful. Now, what I came across as I researched this was that the big influence on adolescent mental health is poverty and inequalities. If you look and see other people, other family, and you think your family's poor, there's a lot of this sort of upward comparison. Then the children who see their own family as poor or disadvantaged are more likely to suffer from poor mental health. And I just always think that the self-harm data is very interesting. A very good researcher called Sally McManus drew my attention to this. Young women living in the most deprived households are 5 times more likely to self-harm than those in the least deprived. You know, it's not just nice middle-class girls slashing their arms. And so inequalities and poverty, and this makes me sad, because, I mean, today the Chancellor's going to make his statement, and God knows whether he will cut benefits further. Who knows? But what we do know is that if that happens, and when that happens, this is damaging children's mental health. And whatever we do to help families is but sticking plaster. So what about the father's own mental health? We've made clear that this is quite significant, and I was very interested in this finding, which is that at child age 12, 15% of fathers reported significant depression within the previous 2 years, compared with, in the same sample, just 10.7% who reported this in their infant's first year. So it's worse. The father's mental health is worse. It could be that there's various reasons why this could be, but the fact is it is. And just when your kid is entering adolescence is not the time when you want to have poor mental health. And we've thought about this for our recommendations later. Now, the final area, I want to look at adolescent risk behaviors, because, of course, that's very socially important. If kids are out there beating up old ladies, then of course, society suffers, as well as the adolescents. And there isn't so much catastrophizing going on about adolescent risk behaviours. There's a lot of attention paid to knife crime, as we know, and that has gone up in England and to a lesser extent in Wales. But I don't think, the researchers think that the way the policing is happening is probably different, because in Glasgow, in Scotland, they've managed to reduce knife crime over the same period. So we do hear about that. And because there's a lot of attention paid to it, I think we probably get the thought that adolescents are out there doing terrible things all the time. And I think I found this one of the most fascinating findings really went in all the work we did for this report, which is that between 1980 and the year 2000, adolescents' bad behaviours, criminality, drug misuse, alcohol, early pregnancy, all these things were on the rise across those 20 years. Parents were blamed. Everyone thought it was the parents until they did a bit of research and found that actually father and mother adolescent relationships were improving across that period, and parenting was getting better too. So they couldn't pin it on the parents, but they weren't clear why it was. But since the year 2000, we've seen the reverse. Over the last 20 years, adolescents have been engaging far less, amazingly far less, in the risk behaviours that we associate with adolescence. So let's just have a little look at this. Looking at antisocial behaviour criminality. Proven offences committed by 10 to 17-year-olds in England and Wales dropped 81% between 2012 and 2022. And if you think that it's just that the police aren't doing their job properly, it's not the case, because there's a lot of other research interviewing young people themselves which comes to very similar conclusions. Smoking. Okay, 2002, 28% of 15-year-old girls smoked every week. By the time we get to 2018, so 16 years later, just 3% had smoked at least 3 times in the last 30 days. When I heard the government saying they were going to stop selling cigarettes to kids, I thought, well, why are you even bothering with this? Because hardly any of them are smoking at all. Vaping obviously needs to be controlled. 12% of 15-year-old girls vape regularly. It's nothing like the 28% that was smoking regularly in 2002. Hold on. Yeah, that's right. So now we come to alcohol. So in 2002, 52% of 15-year-old boys and 48% of 15-year-old girls said they drank alcohol every week. In 2018, only 7% of 15-year-olds had drunk alcohol at least 3 times in the previous month. Huge drop. Early sexual activity. Similarly, in 2002, 35% of 15-year-olds in England said they'd already had sexual intercourse. That was in 2002. 2018, it almost halved. It was down to 20%. So now let's look at some of the father factors in relationship to these sort of to adolescent outcomes, adolescent risk behaviour. And then we might talk about what's been happening with that trend and why it is. We come to our old friend, father involvement. So low father involvement at child age 7 is associated with daughter's young age at first pregnancy, which means young age at experimentation sexually. And then you get the converse to that, closeness to father, the father caring about school achievement, and good father adolescent conversations about sex are all linked to lower sexual risk behaviours. There's a strong association between father involvement at age 7 and closeness to father in adolescence. I put that in here because you don't get this sort of close, warm, involved relationship during adolescence, which is going to protect these kids against so much, if you haven't had it earlier. And that's why we've stressed in this that when we talk about adolescence, we also have to talk about the whole of the parenting cycle, because you need to get the father-child relationship close in early on, so that it then is likely to carry on. So fathers' roles in declining adolescent risk behaviours. Okay, I'm not going to do a whole screen on this, but it is the most fascinating things. So here we've had this decline in adolescent risk behaviours over 20 years. And what do we know about fathers' roles in that? Are they playing a part, or mothers for that example, that reason, for that Yeah, and they are. So father and mother relationships with their children are improving, the communication, feelings of closeness and so on across the world, 32 countries it was looked at. And Wales, interestingly enough, has had quite a substantial improvement. So over this period, relationships with parents are getting better. Does this mean that adolescents are more likely to spend more time at home because they're not needing to go out so much? We don't know, but it could be a factor. Certainly a major, if not the major factor, and this is going to give you a shock, and some of you may go, oh, but, and that is that it's the screen use. These adolescents are not spending very much time comparatively unsupervised in public spaces. They're not having so many parties. They're not even meeting up so much. They're doing a lot of meeting up with the young people they are friendly with, also online. But that's in the relative safety of their own bedrooms. I haven't done a whole analysis of screen use and what goes on there, because that's only emerging as a study field. But the point is, because the kids are not going out, they're doing far less damage to themselves and to society in many ways. So, what are our recommendations? I put them all up here at once. I will discuss each one very quickly. The paternity, we've said right through that it's getting the relationships between the fathers and their kids right from the beginning. And at the moment, as most of you will know, the paternity and parental leave systems are ghastly. Fathers get 2 weeks low paid leave in the first year. Mothers get 52 weeks, 6 weeks highly paid, the rest of it low paid or unpaid. But the fathers are generally the main breadwinners at this point. And so unless the leave is longer and well paid and just for them, they can't take it. So we have the last slide I'm going to leave with you. We're doing a petition to the government to reform the system, and you can have a QR code. There's a QR code there, and there's also you can find it on our website where you can sign the petition. It would be great if you did. Another important thing that we've covered a lot at the Fatherhood Institute over all this work that Nuffield has funded is looking at the data systems. When a child is registered at the nursery, is there a name? Is there only one parent's name? Similarly with social work, when they're filling out the form for the child to, is there a place? Do they ask where the child is? There a place for the father's name? So that kind of thing. One of the most striking ones that some researchers at UCL are really quite strong on, and we think is most important, is that the birth notifications, when a baby's born, there's a thing called the birth notification that goes out to the different registry offices to announce that there will be a birth, and then parents will have to come in and register the birth. The birth notifications give the child an NHS number, the newborn, and they don't have the father's details on them, even though about 95% of the fathers are at the birth. Most of the antenatal staff will meet the fathers. They mostly come in at least once and often more often. And over 90% are at the scans, for example. So the father's name is not included when the birth notification is sent out, let alone his NHS number. If the mother's, the father's, and the infant's NHF numbers were all in the same place, researchers would be in heaven. You'd be able to track so much great stuff. The last three, early years settings in schools should systematically engage with children's fathers at registration, so not just mum's name, and at the start of each key stage, including in secondary school. And the transition from primary to secondary school should be regarded as an intervention opportunity. We do a lot of stuff around how we're going to help the children settle in, but do we screen for mental and physical health in mothers and fathers? We could do that within the current NHS offer. It doesn't have to cost any extra. Could we help those parents get screened and then think about what we could do with the results? And finally, training. We worked a lot, we still work a lot with loads of workforces. and we find that they think they're doing well with fathers. And then we make them look at it, and they have a fathers group on a Saturday that 10 fathers attend, and they think they're doing really well, and they've got 3,000 mothers, and they're not seeing any of the other fathers. And we include in this that they need to engage not just with the fathers who live with their children full time, but with the fathers who don't. And we call these fathers own household fathers. We don't call them separated fathers or non-resident fathers. They're fathers with their own household with whom their child often stays. So thank you very much. That's my final screen. There's a petition there for Parliament, and there's the QR code. And we'll be sending round this to many people, and others will be able to see on our website. So thank you.